Hello everyone, welcome to Internally Screening, where today we're going to be doing another Hooptober review as we've been doing throughout October. It is the spooky month, and what is spookier than someone coming from outer space? Today we're going to be reviewing The Man from Planet X, directed by Edgar G. Ulmer, aka Edmund Gulmer, who made this film for an absolute micro budget of about 50 grand.
Damn.
Yeah, back in 1952, which is pretty impressive really.
Yeah.
And it is very much a B-movie horror schlock film of its time, in which a guy travels to the Scottish moors where strange goings-on are happening, and an alien does indeed fall to Earth in a spaceship. And without spoiling much, that is pretty much what happens in the film, to be completely brutally honest. What did you think of this?
Well, I thought this was hilariously terrible, but in like kind of a charming way. So it should be said that part of the conceit of the film is that the reason for this guy traveling to Scotland is that a planet X is coming into orbit around Earth in like this sort of weird ellipsis around Earth that only comes into contact with us every few thousand years or something like that, and they, getting all these strange sort of telemetry data, and this place in Scotland is where it's going to be the closest point between these two planets. They discover the man from Planet X, who appears to have travelled there, and the spooky reveal of the man in his costume is essentially a bloke with a big styrofoam head. Yeah,
and unfortunately that is basically the horror element of the film.
Yeah.
Is you have a guy in an absolutely hilarious mono expression mask.
Yeah.
Where he just kind of goes,
and he makes weird noises like
and that's like it.
Yeah.
And he's just kind of a gormless idiot.
It's very much like early Doctor Who level kind of special effects, where it's just kind of a man in like, you'd think of like the early Cybermen where they literally just had cloth balaclavas over their head.
Straw tubes and shit.
Yeah, exactly. It's very much like that. And like his threat is very minimal in terms of, well, one, his design is inherently goofy and therefore like it doesn't pose any real threat. And his weaponry is like, he has like this gun that he points at them occasionally. That it looks like a bit of like tubing that you'd get out of like the bottom of your kitchen sink or something. Like you rip like a copper pipe out of the wall.
I think what's most damning about him as a scary presence is the guy who's wearing the costume is clearly so uncertain of where he is, because you can't see a fucking thing. And once you notice that that's what's going on, because obviously that's what's going on, it's impossible to see anything else other than like the poor actor who has to be in this costume going like, are there steps here?
Yeah, exactly. They go out onto the moor, they find the spaceship, they find the man. They take the man back to their house in the moors, and they essentially
knock him out, basically.
Well, initially, essentially what they do is the core concept of arrival, which is they try and communicate with him.
Yeah, they try and talk to him.
Which is quite an interesting concept. I quite like that as a beat.
What I found more interesting was the sexual tension between the alien and our sort of main antagonist, who's just a guy who's a bit of a dickhead, who just, for no good or interesting or kind of genuinely motivated reason, just decides that he's going to knock the alien out.
He's going to just attack it and just like,
And there was a moment where he was sort of at odds with the alien, where I just felt that there was a real chance.
There was a real,
he was going to make love to the alien.
There was a sexual charge. I caught that as well. I thought it was, and it was a real.
And I think the film should have explored that.
It was a real disappointment when the man didn't fuck the alien. It would have been. It made for a more interesting film, but he instead just kind of incapacitates it by, I think, choking it out essentially.
Yeah, he turns a tube.
It's like a little thing on his neck that controls his alien oxygen.
Yeah.
And he passes out. And so because he has done that, then there is a kind of a new sort of rivalry between this man and like a distrust rather between him and the humans.
Yes.
So it's then revealed that he has like essentially a mind beam thing, array that he can use to control people. So the first time they go out onto the moors, the two doctor scientist guys go out, and the older one suddenly has this sort of strange feeling come over him, and he kind of needs to be steered home in like a trance. And then when he gets back, he's like, oh shit, I had no control over myself whatsoever. He becomes really suggestible. And so that becomes like the cool way that the alien can get things done.
And this concept is probably one of the more interesting elements of the film. It's not particularly done in an interesting way, and the sort of idea of mob mentality and like groupthink and the motivations for why people do things kind of become thematic in the film when people figure out there's this alien that's showed up and they're all scared, and then you have this kind of scene where they're all like, we're going to go and do something about it.
Yeah.
And he essentially just turns them all into labourers to build a trench.
Yeah,
so
he's like trying to like...
He can take off.
He's trying to dig his spaceship out of the crater at landing.
Yeah.
What's kind of goofy about that is that the suggestibility, it doesn't only work the one way that the alien wants.
Yeah, it's like you're just put in a state where it's like, once you're in that state, you'll just do whatever anyone says.
Which is... if there would be any scientific basis for an idea like that, it does make logical sense that you would put someone in a trance-like state rather than it being like a sort of specific to one person. But in terms of like that sci-fi element, it does really remove a level of his power and authority, because when our protagonists realize what's going on, they just show up, go walk that way and keep going, and then everyone just leaves and everyone's safe again because they're outside of the mind beam range.
Yeah, there's a sort of just generally underwhelming quality to this film.
Yeah,
in every way, and that I think continues to the climax where they essentially blow him up with a rocket launcher. And I think the sign of a bad storyline, especially like in a lot of sci-fi, is when you have the military just show up and kill the thing. We had a similar thing with Them last year.
Oh god, yes, yeah. This does have Them energy.
I just think when the military show up and just solve the problem, it's kind of a boring ending, especially when they just kind of blow up this shit prop and that's it. I guess the sort of interesting element of that scene is it's like, it turns out he's from a dying planet, and his motivation was to like, I don't know if they specify like, he's going to terraform it or like invade it.
I think they were saying that he wants to like move his people to Earth or something along those lines.
But ultimately, whilst that could be an interesting motivation for an alien, and obviously it's a motivation for an alien that we've since seen in countless films. The film really doesn't take any interesting look at it. They just blow him up.
It's amazing how tertiary the core conceit of the film becomes, because like the real driving force of that opening part of the film is a planet is literally about to show up on our doorstep. This is like a generational event. This is unforeseen and unheard of in human history. This is going to change the world to have this event happen, and then it's kind of forgotten about, really.
It becomes more about the sort of random bits and pieces happening in the middle between people.
Like I get the focus on the man from Planet X as kind of like the spokesperson for the planet, for want of a better phrase, but the threat of this thing, this planet coming into orbit, just kind of dissipates, and then it shows up and it goes and it's done, and it's
they kind
really
of do
underwhelming.
A non-linear opening where he's like like at the beginning of the film, he's like, there's this thing that's going to happen. It's like, oh wow, this is sort of building a lot of tension. But I guess the core problem for me with this film is that when you have a low budget, like emphasis on low budget film, obviously, okay, the suit looks a bit shit, we can get past that. But what a good low budget film can do is like investigate, the motivations of the alien, because that doesn't really cost anything, right?
No, it doesn't.
You can just like bring in an interesting concept, and this film is just like really lacking in that, and it almost feels like a film made around some random props that they had, as opposed to a film where they had a good concept and they wanted to make that. And that probably is what they thought they were doing. I'm not saying that they literally just had some props.
You're right, it feels very skeletal. It feels like you had the bones of a project and then they really didn't do anything to enhance it beyond those core kind of template elements, really.
Yeah, like we haven't even mentioned the fact that there's like a romance plot in this film, because it's just so fucking pointless.
Yeah, it's so secondary, and it doesn't really feel that. I mean, there's a kind of charm to it at the beginning for sure, but it definitely kind of falls by the wayside towards the middle and end of the film.
Oh right, 'cause she's like, oh yeah, you used to know me.
I used to be like the nerd, but now I'm hot. Now I'm hot and successful, so deal with it. And then there is some of those performances are all right from like those core...
None of the acting is terrible.
I wouldn't go so far as saying that. I would say that from those core people, the acting's pretty good.
Who's terrible?
But the terrible part comes when the townspeople were involved.
Yeah, they're a little bit more questionable.
So it's set in Scotland, and
oh god,
and they clearly...
I forgot about that.
It was as though they spent all the money on this film on finding the Americans with the worst Scottish impersonations possible.
Then 'twas I saw it. It was one, the bogey. Bogey.
Like that's
the real alien element in the film was the idea of being a Scottish person.
Yeah, like I loved it because it did actually add to the charm of it in a way, because it was just so distractingly silly. Like these sort of these clearly American actors. If they were Scottish, I don't know how they were doing bad Scottish accents.
No way.
But they're just like, oh, I saw this then.
No, it was just like the director clearly just be vaguely British.
Yeah,
just be like, all right, mate, I'm Scottish.
Yeah. Some of them slurring their lines and like there was no consistency to it whatsoever. But it was really entertaining, and it kind of it lifted that what would have been a very boring back half of the film.
Really damning with faint praise there.
Yeah, oh, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's what I kind of opened this review by saying, is that like it is a bad film, on so many levels, but it still had that little sort of human quality to it that kind of made it personal and
I don't know
charming.
where it was shot. I'm going to assume it wasn't in Scotland.
Yeah, I would assume not.
It seemed like a lot of it was studio, but you had some kind of cool, like,
there were some decent
misty
sets.
shots of what are supposedly the Scottish moors, but I assume
yeah,
not
well,
actually.
so I think we were looking into the background of this film. I believe they were using sets from a different film.
Oh right, yeah, something like that.
I forget which film it was. I'll put it up on screen now. But basically, as a means of cost cutting, it was like, oh well, we've got these sets left over from this other production. Let's just use those. And they look good. Like the house set is really good. Like the one, their kind of main base of operations. And the Moors stuff, it probably reuses like the same area each time.
It looks decent.
When you flood it with all the, the sort of dry ice and fog and stuff, it looks good. It was effective. But then, just populate it with like really terrible Scottish accents.
And the one prop that really matters is this ridiculous fucking
alien
face, which just looks terrible. So
they spent sort of 20 quid on that.
It's the kind of thing you get from a party shop these days. Yeah.
You would not be able to sell that at a party shop. There is no way in hell.
Well, you would if I was the customer. This is hilarious.
I would buy that if they. Oh man, you know what? Now that it's got me thinking, I wonder if the original head of the man from Planet X is on like eBay.
Yeah, probably.
And I would buy that straight up.
They did like
if it was like a couple $100, I wouldn't go any more than that. But if it was like a little film rarity, I think that'd be fucking sick. Yeah, that kind of sums it up. I mean, there's one extra little bit I wanted to briefly touch upon is before they blow up the ship, they have one final like hand-to-hand combat bit,
which is also quite underwhelming.
Super underwhelming because once again, the man from Planet X, the big bad, the scary alien force,
just an
is beaten by very minimal physical effort, and then by turning a knob on his fucking shoulder that turns his air off.
He's almost like. It seems like, he's dressed up in this fancy technology, and it's supposed to be this kind of like advanced creature, but he's essentially like an idiot with plumbing for a suit.
Yeah.
Because all you need to do is turn the tap off and he goes...
No, but actually, Rupert, no, I've thought about this. Right. Film's brilliant because it's actually a really deep exploration on the way the West treats refugees.
Shut the fuck up.
Because, right, the fact that he's so weak and pathetic is like this idea is the fact of like historically the West has been the source of like a lot of power in the world, and this man comes seeking help and he's actually quite flimsy and helpless, and we're supposed to see this as like a hero coming and being like defeating this invasive force, but actually he's just someone being like, please help my people. And like him being so helpless and so pathetic.
Way too fucking long. Jesus Christ. What are you rating it?
4 out of 10.
Yeah, I'm sort of between a 3 and a 4.
It's probably not a 4, but it's just.
I can't
charming.
even remember what I rated it, but
I
wouldn't recommend it. This is the kind of film that you should only ever consider watching if you really have a morbid interest and you want to see a really, really early example of sci-fi horror, right? There's not enough meat on the bones, and there's plenty other examples which I can't think of off the top of my head of like an early alien film. This might even be the earliest I've seen, but we're saying early. This is a 1951 film, so there are plenty of great films out at this point. I mean, you look at like some of the really early Hitchcocks or The Testament of Dr. Mabuse, which we mentioned in a previous review.
Yeah,
like how much those films were doing, or even, you know, Cabinet Dr. Caligari, right? All of these films are doing a lot more than this. And granted, it's on a small budget, but I mean, take Cat People, for example. Yeah. That film probably wasn't the most expensive film to ever make. It looks really, really good.
Yeah, because they focus on characters.
Exactly, yeah. And like, you know, and it has a great storyline, and it has, you know, beautiful cinematography. But that core story could be told in a cheaper way and still be effective, because the core story is really good, and I don't think this film has a good core story.
Yeah, this film is as bare bones as you can get, and it's only really approachable in that kind of headspace of, I want to watch some old school schlock, Ed Wood style, you know, like that kind of vibe. And even then, Ed Wood has a lot more history and sort of cult drama around its inception and stuff. Like, there's a lot more humanity in those projects. So
and I think the base competence that this film has in its sort of direction, and it sort of generally looks good, sounds all right, you know, it has, you know, some music and all that, kind of adds to this more bland feeling, because with an Ed Wood production, you're going to get an absolute car crash.
Exactly.
So it's kind of funny in that way. So that has been our review of The Man from Planet X. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, give it a like. If you dislike this video, give it a dislike. We've got more Hooptober reviews coming, plus plenty of other content past October, and we'll catch you in the next one. Peace.